All right, let's just jump right into it. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we are going to break down some absolutely fascinating and honestly pretty intense material from Professor Zhang. So, for a little context here, Professor Zhang is a former Yale honors student and a Harvard researcher. He spent 2 solid decades teaching inside Asia's most elite institutions, meaning he has seen the absolute top tiers of both the American and Chinese systems from the inside out. Today, we're going to neutrally unpack his really complex game theory models that attempt to predict where our global systems are heading. It is a lot to wrap our heads around, so let's get into it. 90%. Just let that sink in for a second. This number actually represents Professor Jiang's most startling geopolitical prediction. Based on his analysis of things like expanding global wars, incoming fertilizer and food shortages, and massive environmental strain, his model predicts that up to 90% of humanity could die off in the next 50 years. Yeah, I know, that is an incredibly heavy way to start, but understanding exactly how he arrived at this chilling number is exactly what we're going to unpack today. Section 1, a 50-year global warning, looking at a world severely off balance. So you might be wondering, why are millions of people suddenly paying such close attention to his methodology? Well, in early 2024, Jiang laid out these 3 highly politically charged predictions on camera. And according to the source material, the first 2 of these predictions have already unfolded exactly as he modeled them. Now, whether you agree with his overall worldview or not, his framework is mapping onto current events with enough precision that it definitely warrants a very close look at his underlying logic. Moving on to Section 2, Game Theory Strategy and Maritime Choke Points. Okay, so the crucial starting point here is the Mackinder theory. This is an 18th and 19th century British military strategy. The core idea? Basically, if you want to maintain a global empire, you don't necessarily need to control all the land. Instead, you need absolute control over maritime trade routes and narrow geographical choke points. Think about it. By controlling places like the Red Sea, the Strait of Malacca, or the Panama Canal, an empire gets to dictate exactly who gets access to the world's resources. Historically, this exact strategy was used by naval powers to keep massive land powers from ever unifying Eurasia with railways. Now, Chang applies this exact theory to modern American geopolitics. He neutrally characterizes the current structure of the US dollar as a quote-unquote Ponzi scheme that relies entirely on global demand. With the national debt soaring the way it is, his model suggests that the primary strategy available to the US is to utilize this Mackinder theory. The idea is that by fostering chaos or conflict in Eurasia and the Middle East, energy suppliers end up isolated. And what does that do? It forces allied nations to rely almost exclusively on American energy and American weapons. And crucially, those have to be purchased in US dollars, which keeps the currency supreme. All right, Section 3, Symptoms of Decline, looking into why empires start to fail. So Zhang identifies 3 major historical markers of imperial collapse. First up is financialization. This is essentially a society that becomes obsessed with stock buybacks and get-rich-quick schemes rather than actually manufacturing real goods. Second, a demographic crisis. For example, he points to baby boomer politicians like 93-year-old Senator Chuck Grassley who refuse to retire. That dynamic, he argues, creates a really desperate and indifferent youth culture. And the third marker, elite overproduction. To expand on that last point, under Peter Turchin's model, you basically end up with way too many powerful people fighting for way too few seats at the table. We see the old guard of Wall Street, right? Their goal is to maintain the current systemic hegemony. But then you have the new guard, the Silicon Valley tech oligarchy. Zhang argues that tech billionaires like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel throwing their weight behind Donald Trump is actually a highly strategic move by this new guard to completely overthrow that old financial elite. It's literally an internal structural war. Which brings us to Section 4, the AI control grid. Is it salvation or enslavement? Here, we are looking at 2 starkly different views of the future. On one side, you have Elon Musk's tech utopia, this idea where AI and robotics free us all from forced labor and create a paradise. But on the other side, you have Professor Zhang's surveillance state. Drawing on his 2 decades of living in China, Zhang argues that AI is, at its core, just a recursive database management tool. It's built to sort, search, predict, and ultimately control human behavior. He describes a society that is, sure, incredibly safe and convenient, but ultimately operates as a totally soulless gig economy where people, like taxi drivers, are ruthlessly docked pay by completely heartless automated algorithms. To really grasp the danger here, Zhang uses a brilliant anecdote about self-driving cars. AI companies have struggled for a decade now to make fully autonomous vehicles. Why? Because algorithms simply cannot map out human intention or unpredictable edge cases, like, say, a frustrated driver intentionally causing an accident. Because the algorithm can't account for human free will, the tech industry's only real solution is to remove the steering wheel entirely. To make the system work perfectly, you basically have to eliminate human autonomy. And that leads us right into this, frankly, terrifying economic logic. Xing poses the question, aren't you better off turning humans into robots than mass manufacturing robots? I mean, really think about it. With incoming fertilizer shortages from those maritime choke points leading to famine, you're soon going to have millions of desperate refugees. And these refugees already hold microchips right in their pockets, their smartphones. To the algorithm, it is vastly cheaper to use this desperate human gig economy workforce as essentially robotic laborers than it is to physically mine minerals and manufacture heavy mechanical robots from scratch. This shifts us to Section 5, Rewiring the Human Mind, how to actually survive the system. Now, you have to understand, Zhang is not just some detached academic crunching numbers. His personal trajectory is wild. He was a 7-year-old immigrant who couldn't even speak English and was told to go back to kindergarten. Then he gets validated by a teacher, pushes himself to the absolute brink, and graduates from Yale with honors. But here is the crazy twist. By age 30, he was a completely broken, unemployed filmmaker drinking in a basement. He completely fell apart under the immense pressure of that rigid, IQ-only, never-fail programming from his elite Ivy League education. So, to literally save his own life, he had to rely on neuroplasticity. This is our brain's amazing ability to rewire its synapses and fundamentally change our internal programming when we're exposed to radically challenging new circumstances. In his 30s, Zhang aggressively rewired his own brain. He forced himself to do stand-up comedy just to conquer his paralyzing fear of humiliation. He threw himself into Brazilian jiu-jitsu to conquer his fear of physical pain. He intentionally broke down all of that elite programming. He actually shares this incredibly vivid anecdote from when he went to cooking school during this whole reinvention phase. He proudly presented his dish to the chef, and the chef just looked at it and bluntly said, "I'm not touching this." It was this massive humiliation ritual that completely shattered his Yale-bred arrogance. But it forced him to look around and genuinely respect an 18-year-old classmate who was waking up at 4 a.m. every single day just to chop vegetables. It taught him the stark difference between fabricated academic status and genuine, gritty effort. Through his own failures and all his subsequent research, Zhang synthesized what actually makes humans thrive. Interestingly, he calls raw IQ a fabricated hierarchy. Instead, true success actually relies on 3 pillars. First is self-control, meaning the ability to delay gratification, like what was proven in the famous marshmallow test. Second is resilience, which aligns with Carol Dweck's concept of a growth mindset, basically welcoming failure as a learning tool. And third is self-reflection, practicing deliberate objective weakness assessment, just like Anders Ericsson talks about. But honestly, here is the most profound part of his entire psychological deep dive. He found that all 3 of those traits, self-control, resilience, and self-reflection, ultimately rest on one single foundation: unconditional love. If you receive unconditional love as a child, it prevents self-hatred, it completely eliminates the fear of failure, and it breeds the deep resilience you need to survive in a chaotic world. All right, final part, Section 6, Reclaiming Attention and Purpose. If algorithms view human agency as a bug or an error to be managed, then reclaiming your agency is the ultimate act of rebellion. And Zhang's advice here is incredibly practical: micro-level self-defense. Step 1, turn off your screens. Your attention is literally your most valuable commodity. Do not just hand it over to the algorithm. Step 2, take long walks and read real books. Be present in the physical world. And step 3, ignore societal programming. Trust your gut instinct, because the broader system is absolutely not designed with your best interests at heart. He shares this really beautiful final story. Back when he was completely broke, living in a basement, considering himself an absolute failure, he finally abandoned his rigid intellectual life plans. Instead, he just sought out genuine human connection, and he met the woman who would become his wife, someone who loved him unconditionally, completely regardless of his lack of status. To him, this proved that abandoning the algorithms of success in favor of genuine love is the true path forward. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. The macro-level chaos we talked about today, the geopolitics, the massive economic shifts, the AI control grids, all of that might be entirely out of our hands. But your micro-level reality, that is entirely yours. So, in a world that is structurally designed to predict and control your behavior through algorithms, how will you reclaim your attention, your love, and your agency today?